Anyone else? All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome into the Schaumburg Library. My name is Chris. I'm your Adult Programs Coordinator here at the library. I'm so excited to be continuing our Civic Awareness Series with the League of Women Voters with y'all this evening. Before I turn things over to the League of Women Voters and, of course, our speakers, just a few of our friendly library reminders. If you could all take a moment to silence your cell phones and any other electronic device that may make noise during the presentation, as sounds and lights emitted by those devices are distracting to your fellow patrons, as well as the speakers. If you have any questions for this evening's speakers or in-person audience, you kind of know the drill at this point with our Civic Awareness Series. If you could throw your hand high in the air at any time during the program, our speakers won't take your questions in that moment, but my friends Julie and Ricky, who are at the back of the room, will bring you a little note card. You can write the questions down on that. The League of Women Voters will be fielding some questions at the end of the presentation. If you are online, Julie and Ricky will not come to your house and give you a note card, but you can use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. There will be a device that the League of Women Voters has, and they can see your questions. They'll be able to field those as well. So don't worry, online audience, we will still make sure your questions get taken. For our in-person audience, if at any point you need a restroom during the program, you can find those located directly out this exit door here. Women's is going to be immediately on the left, and gentlemen's is further down the hall. In between both of those doors, there is a water fountain if you need any water or refreshment during the program. For our at-home audience, I hope you know where your restrooms and water are located, or I do not. But if you need additional assistance during the program, we have closed captions enabled for your convenience. You can turn those on or off as you wish using your Zoom toolbar. And if you're experiencing any other technical difficulties, you can use the Q&A to reach out to me, and I will do my best and go back and forth with you to hopefully fix whatever problem you may have. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of my friends from the League of Women Voters of the Palatine, Barrington, Schaumburg area, getting better at that every time. Marianne Yazda will introduce our speakers this evening.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Good evening, and thank you for joining the League of Women Voters of Palatine, Barrington, and Schaumburg areas and the Schaumburg Township District Library for another Civic Awareness program. I am Marianne Gazdo, who along with Vice President Kelly Kleva, are co-chair for the Civic Awareness events for our chapter. I would like to provide a little information about the League. We are a political, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to increase voter engagement and defend democracy. You may be familiar with some of our activities. We hold candidate forums during the election cycle, we hold voter registration events, and we advocate for issues of local, state, and national level. We welcome the energy of all ages and genders to join us in supporting our mission. If you are interested in learning more about the League, you can stop by the membership table, her hand is raised, okay, to go to our website, hwvpalatinearea.org. Okay, introduction of speakers. We have tonight Tauya, I did it. Forst is an attorney and professor of criminal justice and studies at the College of DuPage. She holds a BA from Bradley University, a MS from Grand Canyon University, a JD from Northern Illinois University, and a graduate certificate on both online instruction and restorative practices. Professor Frost's legal experience includes intermediate law, education, and restorative practices. As an avid champion, I'm do better without my glasses. These aren't that good from Costco. Don't buy them from there. As an avid champion of restorative practices, Professor Forst strives to bring a restorative lens to the criminal and social justice conversation, both nationally and internationally. She is an active member of the DuPage County Bar Association. Additionally, she has received many awards for teaching and innovation in higher education. Currently, she is finishing her time as the 2024-2025 Outstanding Full-Time Faculty Member of the College of DuPage and recently received the American Association of Community Colleges Faculty Distinction Recognition, DLI, Okay. Parnell Award for faculty who have made a difference in the classroom. Richard Forst, our second speaker, is an attorney and adjunct professor of criminal and justice studies of College of DuPage. He holds a BA from Loyola University of Chicago and a JD from the IIT Chicago-Kent College of Law. Attorney Forst maintains his own law practice and is a licensed attorney in Portland Hills, Illinois, concentrating in criminal defense, family law and bankruptcy law. He is a litigator with over 40 years of experience in state and federal courts, primarily in DuPage, Cook, and Will counties. Additionally, he teaches constitutional law and criminal law at College of DuPage. Tauya and Richard co-wrote a textbook entitled Constitutional Law Comes Alive, an innovative approach, second edition. I'd like to introduce to you our speakers for tonight. Yes. You need this.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Good evening. Good evening. I am excited to be here. This is my passion. You might see it a time or two as we go through the evening. As colorful as you see this, you see I'm as colorful, right? I'm matching this energy because just because we're speaking of something that is justice doesn't mean it has to be boring and dull and not colorful. We want to make sure you guys know that you are free to ask questions. You're free to engage. In fact, we have a little application for you later. So we're going to start off, I think, with a little bit of dialogue, just to see and get us warmed up as to what restorative justice is.
Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to explain to the audience is the word restorative.
So a lot of times people think that the word restorative actually means that there is less of some penalty going forward, but it's the exact opposite. There is an accountability and responsibility that isn't inherent necessarily in the criminal justice system that restorative justice and restorative practices brings. One piece of research that you might note is that individuals who go through the criminal justice system, they are 25% satisfied. Doesn't matter what the sentence is, doesn't matter what happens. For our online audience and for our in-person audience, I have a question for you. How satisfied do you think individuals are when they both couple criminal justice and restorative justice together?
80%.
80%? Whew, you have high hopes.
I was going to say 50.
50?
30.
But now keep it in mind, criminal justice is just 25%, right? Well, the research has determined that individuals are 75% very much satisfied. It does not matter if their particular receives the sentence that they want. It doesn't matter if they actually are convicted. What matters is the context and the actual process that restorative justice brings. So in our time together, I hope to show you why this word restorative really sets the bar so high between criminal justice and restorative justice. You guys are ready?
I have one more question.
One more question. He always has questions.
So the root of the word restorative is restore. So the question is, what exactly is being restored?
That's actually a really good question. So, and we'll get into it in a second. A piece of information is that people use the word restorative justice and restorative practices interchangeably, but they are not. So we'll get into that in a second. But when it comes to restorative justice, what we're trying to restore is whatever was violated by the crime or the wrongdoing or the harm. So we're trying to bring back the person who received harm. Notice I didn't say the word victim, because when we're talking about restorative justice is an entirely different vocabulary. And the person who caused the harm, for them to come back in some sense of restoring what was there prior to. So an example of that might be a person who was a victim right, victim of a crime, we want them to move into having received harm, and now they feel comfortable going out and no longer looking like what they did before to whomever actually caused that harm. So we might have those two individuals come together in an actual conference, and that person might say things like, "Why did you choose me? What was happening that I looked as if I could be someone that you would cause harm to?" And a lot of times the person will say it's random. But if that's a question in your mind, can you imagine how that would haunt you? So we're trying to restore back your humanity. We're trying to restore back this time in this period before that violation occurred. Okay? Any more questions?
No.
Okay.
Go on.
Let's see if we can go for it. So this is very interactive, and to our audience at home, I also want to make sure that we give them some time to chime in. Audience at home, you can always respond with the chat feature. So our first question is, please note the following slide may produce emotional triggers. If this occurs, please feel free to leave and/or not participate. The reason why I first start with this is because in restorative justice, it is a process by which everyone must agree. It is an equal voice process. It is not something that is forced upon you. It is not something that you have to do. If you do not see the benefit, then it might be that you're not exactly ready for the process. And there are many ways, thank you so much. There are many ways to get there. But I want you to know that if this were sincerely a restorative application, we would come up with a buzzword, a safe word, I'm sorry. And that safe word, once someone says that, the process stops. Okay? So notice the control is moving to the person who has been harmed. Whereas in the criminal justice system, the control is out of their reach. So this process is very much centered on the person who has been harmed. Everybody with me so far? Okay. So now here's our question.
So think about the worst name that you've ever been called by someone else. Think about the worst name you've ever been called. May have been someone when you were a child in school, maybe. It may have been a family member. It may have been just recently by someone that you interacted with. But think about the worst name that you've been called by somebody.
Everyone has it in their mind? Yep. Okay.
Sounds like everybody's got a worse name.
It didn't take much. I saw that.
Now think about the worst name you've been called by someone that's actually true. Someone called you by a name that you know in your heart it's true.
Have some feedback in the front that that's harder. It is. It's harder to kind of go deeper to uncover that, right? Hence why the disclaimer was on that first slide. Do we think we're ready? Or are we still thinking? Online audience, we want you to come with us. Now, keep in mind, this is very much you are in control, so I won't ask you the name. So feel comfortable. Just take a deep breath. I don't want anyone to think that I'm actually leading you to something that you can't come back from, but actually true. We're ready? Okay.
How would you feel if someone labeled you for the worst thing that you've done for your whole life? That label followed you around. For example, you're a thief, and everyone who meets you from that point forward calls you a thief. They say your name, but first they say that person is a thief. They call you a thief at work. They call you a thief at school. They call you a thief at home for the rest of your life. All because of that one worst thing that you did in your life.
Now, keep in mind, the thing that you had in your mind is true, right? There could be a different scenario where we look at the thing that you're called, it isn't true. But it's on purpose that it's true because now we can kind of understand what are some of the ways that we would do if there was something really bad that we have going on. Would we want to share that out? Would we want others to call us by that? And in fact, forget your name. Your name no longer exists, just thief. Come here, thief, sit here, thief, go there, thief, pump this gas, right? So the interesting part of the criminal justice system is in the beginning, it was built around this process called where people would have a penalty of penitentiary, right? And the root word of penitentiary is what? And what does that mean? What does penitence mean? Making up for, but what happens after penitence passes?
You're forgiven.
You're forgiven and you have a clean slate. Well, we got away from that in the criminal justice system. So that was the origin of why the system was even created. And now what we've set up is this kind of scenario. So that is where restorative justice enters, if that makes sense. Okay. Moving right along, what is restorative practices? And you say, wait a second, I'm not here for restorative practices. Am I in the wrong presentation? I'm here for restorative justice. In order for us to talk restorative practice, restorative justice, we have to start with restorative practices. Remember how I said what's really interesting is that people use these terms interchangeably and they are not? Here's why. Restorative practices is an umbrella term used for strategies that help us to proactively build community and relationships and manage conflict and tensions in ways that treat humans with dignity and respect. And I might add, centering the voices, the equal voice of everyone. So we'll get into a little bit about that. So if I'm going to talk about restorative justice, that's only one piece of what we really should be striving for when we're thinking about that kind of concept. And you're welcome to have the slides. You don't have to take pictures. I always share them, okay? Just so we can remain engaged, because sometimes it gets, you want to kind of keep up with both. So what is restorative practices? Really, we have the person who created the harm, right? In most people's minds, that's called the
Criminal offender.
She said criminal offender, defendant, right? Some of that. And we also have the person who was harmed. So the question becomes, why am I not using those words? But those are words that are out there. Restorative practices really centers this language to make sure that you understand we are shifting our mentality. We're looking at this in a different way. So these two people together plus their communities actually helps us to enter into the restorative process. And of course, you can't have a restorative process unless you have a talking piece. Now, when you're dealing with young people, you might have the talking piece that's a little stuffed animal. When you're dealing with people who are incarcerated, it might be a piece of food. I mean, it just depends, right? Your audience might change. But we really like the talking piece to be representative of the parties that are included. So that's something, again, that they have control over making a decision. And when anyone actually has that talking piece, no one else can speak. So I actually use restorative practices in every single class that I have, whether it is online, whether it is, and I do mean asynchronous, right? We're not meeting at a specified time. Whether it is online and it's synchronous, we have a time, or whether it's in person. I use this process to make sure that my students feel like they can come, they can actually share whatever may be going on in their community, and we can get that out to the side and start learning. So each and every class, we start with a check-in question like what you guys had, not that deep, right? We start very slow. But as we build in our class, The students actually come up with the check-in questions. So they really get involved. And this is a way for them to build community, right? To meet new people, because they may not know anyone. And then when we have an assessment and it doesn't go so well, we have a community to discuss that too. So it is twofold. But this is our process for just restorative practices. It is that umbrella term. All right. So then if that's the case, what do you think is the point of restorative justice, considering this is the umbrella? What is it that we're looking for?
Healing.
Healing. Yep, that's a huge part of it. We have anything on our online, we're asking the online participants as well. And in fact, I'm so glad you brought up healing, because the whole basis of restorative practices, it came out of African and indigenous people, this concept that they would come together as a community. Someone would voice whatever harm was amongst them, and they would sit in a circle and hash it out until it was out in the open, healed, and now the whole community is restored back. So healing is right on point. That's a really good point. Although I should say that restorative practices can be healer and it can also be a warrior. So we'll talk about that in a second. And that's really where restorative justice comes in. So healing, but also kind of this concept of how can this process benefit me more so than what the criminal justice process would. So I'll give you an example of a story. A woman who only had one child actually lost her child to murder, okay? Her daughter was murdered by her husband. So now this woman, she goes through the trial, he gets convicted, he gets a life sentence, he's in prison. She goes on with her life. She has no intention of ever speaking to him again. You know, your only child, right? This is really hard. But she comes to a point in her life where for 15 years, she's unable to sleep. Every single night she's up, tossing and turning, trying to determine what is happening. At one point, someone suggests that she actually talk to a victim advocate. The victim advocate says, hey, we just started a new program where your son-in-law is, I'm saying that loosely, right? Where he's located, and we think this program might be beneficial for you. And she said, I'm not interested in any healing or forgiving him of anything. They said, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to. Remember, this process is determined by the person who has been harmed. So she goes on a couple more years, and she's still having these sleepless nights. So finally, she gets in touch with his attorney. His attorney then turns around and he says, hey, how about you just meet with my client? They come into a room and she absolutely from the beginning says, I have no intention of forgiving you. I have no intention of healing. I still wish you will rot in hell. These were her words, not mine. I don't speak in that colorful language. I just wear colorful. But she said, I do have one question for you. One question. What do you think the question was?
Why did I do
Nope. Everyone says that.
it?
Nope. Any other guess? Huh?
Do you regret it?
No.
I think about
Did you give up? Okay, you're like my students, like, tell us, okay. What she said was, where is her Bible? You didn't see that coming, did you? I didn't either. So he's like, what? But without thinking, guess where the Bible was?
it is so.
In his cell. So he agrees to go get the Bible. He brings it back to her. She takes the Bible and spits in his face and walks out. You didn't. You didn't, but remember, she said from the very beginning she wasn't interested in forgiveness and healing. I like to tell this story because I think everyone thinks it ends up with a little nice little bow. Not so. If you really allow the process to unfold. So here she goes. She leaves the jail. She's weeping and crying. And now she can't believe he's had the Bible for this many years. And this feels like a betrayal and a death all over again. But guess what happens? She weeps so long and so hard. This is her first night in 18 years that she sleeps. And from that point forward, she slept every night thereafter. Could the courts have given her that? That is the power of restorative justice. It isn't pretty all the time. It isn't something that everybody should engage in. But what I will say is, what really occurs is that there's this almost magical point where the person who has been harmed can reach that moment of what they need. They get what they need, and they start their own healing journey. Sometimes that's with the offender, sometimes it's not. And that's okay. So Richard, what do we have here?
So what you're looking at is our layout right here, right?
See, I told you this was like not genuine, right?
The typical layout, we've got the podium on the right side here instead of the center, but it's pretty close to what you see right there. All the chairs, everyone in the room, everybody I'm looking at facing me or facing her. Nobody's facing each other. Nobody's facing out, nothing like that at all. Everything's centered on the speaker. That's an us versus them setup. Basically, it means that one person is in charge of the whole conversation. One person is leading it. One person is participating, unless others are invited by the speaker, but they're not expected to speak like the speaker is, right? We're expected to be leading this presentation.
What about this one?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, what do you think about this one? Do the audience, I open this up to the audience, what do you see different from the first slide to this slide?
Participants are facing each other.
They're facing each other. What else?
No one said they had they're all equal.
All equal,
You
right?
can tell who's leading it.
You can't, because it's almost like one equal voice, one equal circle. And this forces you to look at one another. So here's my plug, whether, I don't know, appropriate or not. When you're on social media, when you're behind all of these devices, right, you're not looking at a human in their eyes. When you look at a human in their eyes, it does something to your soul. There's a total difference. So it isn't that you don't feel the same things. It isn't that you may not want to express the same things, but you feel almost forced to do it in a way that's cordial and human, right? So that is the purpose and the power of the circle. And we will actually experience this genuine piece. I would normally do this whole presentation in a circle, but I'm trying to make sure we have our hybrid piece there. But I really want you guys to experience this. About 3 years ago, industrial partners told us that COD students from our program were well equipped. They were smart, they were engaging. However, they could not look individuals in the eye. So that's when I start to use restorative practices in every single class. What's interesting is they still have that problem. Like, they do not like to look at each other. And I tell them, your job could depend on it. They're like, I don't care. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes, right? We have to be able to connect on a human level. What do you think, Richard? Does the circle equal win-win?
Yes, so I think the main thing that always occurred to me about the circle is that it's easier for people to speak. I mean, it's harder when you're sitting the way you are right now to pipe up and say something. You're kind of reluctant to speak. At least that's the way I would be if I were back out there. Maybe some of you not, but that's the way I look at it. But when you're in a circle, especially if you've been in the circle for maybe a half hour, you don't feel reluctant anymore. You're engaged. You're with everybody. You're willing to say what's on your mind. You're willing to match concept for concept. Say, answer a question, yes or no, that kind of thing. rather than feel like I'm going to just wait to see what the leader's going to do.
Right. And then there's natural barriers, right, with these chairs. Look at how you have to see someone's back. Do you see anyone's back here? And the center is wide open, right? So it just begs a sense of we are engaging with one another. Okay, so what does some of the facilitation look like? And actually, I think you guys have the handout back there. Yep, if we could share the handout. So a lot of times when we talk about restorative practices / restorative justice, a lot of people focus in on the end result. But actually, the work actually occurs here at pre-conference. So pre-conference is the process by which you are looking and dealing with either side, either party, either the person that was harmed or the person that created the harm, and you're working with them so that they can freely and safely come into a circle. You would never just bring people together. You would never just do that. That's actually a recipe for disaster. So I will give you an example of how we use this even at COD. We had a program that was really intimately involved, let's say nursing. It wasn't, so I can use that. And you know how nurses have cohorts when they are learning. So somehow some negative kind of energy entered into the cohort, and now they were having problems, not just with actually having interactions, but doing the cohort work. So because I was leading this kind of charge at the school and I was on what was called the behavior intervention team, we were called in to do pre-conferencing. I was widely surprised when both leaders, if you will, was willing to speak to me. And what I determined was they actually had issue with one another in different ways. So because they could not come together and actually have a discussion, one never knew that the real issue was that they felt like they had had a friendship and the friendship broke. And so now how could they trust them in this professional setting? What if they did the same thing in regards to work? Like, I mean, it might sound petty to you, but when you're working intimately with people, it does make a difference, right? So what we did was we did pre-conferencing for an afternoon with them. Then we brought them in with informal interactions, and we actually empowered the two of them to lead the group, their cohort, because they determined we may never be friends again, but we're sure now we can work together and perhaps not kill anyone in the process, right? Because we want health professionals that can actually help. So if they're bickering, that might mean my life. So I was a little invested. But as they came together, they started the informal interactions, then we went formal, and they were able to resolve it, and they all graduated with honors. Yep, you can clap. So that doesn't typically occur in that kind of, bow tie. But if you truly do the pre-conferencing work, and that might be years, think about our first example, it may be months, you will find that when they come together, even in the criminal justice, through the criminal justice system, restorative justice process, that you might have this same kind of path. So what do we have here? We have victim offender conferences. You guys should have a handout for these. The victim offender conferences are actually when we have a full circle. So we have the person who created the harm and the person who actually received the harm. We have their communities. And you might say, well, what does that look like? So one example of that was a bus driver who was almost fatally beaten by a student on her bus, right? Crying. So you can imagine when she shows up to pre-conferencing, at first she had nothing to say. She did not want to be bothered. In fact, she wasn't sure she would return to the schools because she was very much beaten within an inch of her life. But as time went on, I think to conquer the fear, she pushed forward. And as we began to speak, we were trying to determine for the victim offender conference who would be her community. Because when you have a circle, you bring yourself and then your community, and they share how this has impacted them as well, right? Because the more minds we have together, the better our understanding is. In this particular instance, the bus driver brought her husband, and the young man who actually jumped on her brought his parents. So they were there. The school had representatives, and they started this conference after about 4 months of pre-conferencing. So I don't want to make you think like, oh, this just happened overnight. It really does take work, and it takes patience, and it takes understanding. And you can't push, and you can't try for your own agenda as a facilitator. You have to really listen to what people are telling you and trust them, that they know what they need. So we come together 4 months in, everybody is there, right? And now the question becomes, and we'll get to those questions. You don't say, what is it that you did? You say, what happened? Tell me how you felt when that happened. Tell me what we can do to actually restore where you were prior to this happening. So in that time, first we have our person who caused the harm. And oddly enough, when we get to the parents actually start to say they feel impacted, not that this woman was not badly beaten. Hear me when I say this, but they said that they had to take off work. One actually lost their job because the son had to stay out. And they felt then, because of his behavior, they didn't want to just leave him. And we start to see tears roll down his face. He wasn't even aware his parent had lost their job. He wasn't aware of that, right? So we are now saying this is the accountability and the responsibility piece. Well, then we turn to the person who was harmed and we say, what happened with you? And she says she can't sleep, she can't eat. She feels very much afraid anytime she steps out of her home, which is why she has not been out in 9 months, okay? So we turn to her husband and we say, how about you? He said, my wife, hear me closely. I hope this is not too much. Refuses to engage in sexual relations. So I don't know if you know this, but civilly, you can sue someone for that. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But even the wife did not understand the impact that had occurred during that process. We have a hand.
Question. This particular situation you're talking about, was this within the criminal legal system, or did it stay out of the criminal legal system?
So that's an excellent question, because typically when we're dealing with juveniles, and there's a great program in Des Plaines for peer jury, we try to offer an alternative to actually having someone go to a penitentiary or a prison or jail. So this one was outside of, in lieu of, if that makes sense.
It was outside.
Outside of the system. Yep.
So charges were never filed.
Charges were never filed. He was arrested.
Okay.
He was arrested, but charges were dropped. And in lieu of going through this program, they were able to offer this to him.
Sorry. But,
Oh, no, go ahead.
Was it directed through the court, through the chief judge or anything like that?
So what happens in this particular jurisdiction, they have a program that allows this for juveniles, and it goes through the court process. So probation, the probation. No, it isn't DuPage. No,
Cook?
no.
All right. How many, I mean, 102 counties?
So various counties, I'm reluctant to say it because that starts to give away facts, and I try and keep people's story, right? Remember I said it didn't go through the courts. So a county you know and are aware of, this occurred.
So, sorry, so was he required to go through the process in order to get?
Restorative justice is never a requirement, never. If you require someone, you have just went in the face of the entire process. And I think your question is, was he required in order for it to be diverted out of the system?
Correct.
No.
And you said it much better than I was.
Yeah.
Probably said this already, but if the person who received the harm
Uh-huh.
is not interested, this doesn't occur at all.
This doesn't occur. So it isn't that the charges can't be dropped, but this process in and of itself doesn't. But I do believe if she had not eventually, right, it took 4 months, agreed to it, I do think he would have been charged, and not as a juvenile, but an adult,
How old was that person?
17.
17, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. There was a program that I have read about, I believe it's through the juvie court,
Mhm.
where if they have a felon, but they basically go through the program, then the felony is dropped.
Yeah.
Okay, is that something similar to this?
So those are not truly restorative. I have a slide about that. That's why I think rather than just kind of saying the words, you have to understand the theories behind it. Because what we never want to present to the public is that someone is just doing it because, right? And in that instance, I mean, it's nothing wrong with providing an incentive. We do it all the time in plea bargaining. It isn't adverse to that. But this is supposed to be that system that gives the person who was harmed that kind of control and equal voice. So if we do that, we're going back to the person who created the harm having that upper hand. And we don't want that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I saw a couple more hands. Am I going? Okay. All right. So that's the Victor Offender Conference. The Family Group Conference is the same sort of concept, but then what we're doing is providing supports to that young man, to his family, to anyone who might have been involved, and actually doing a deep dive in why and how he got here in the first place. The community service, I'll give the example of the peer jury. I went in and assessed their peer jury program. And it went like this. If you're charged with a crime and you go through this process, you're diverted out the system. So I said, well, that's not restorative. So they said, okay, we'll make it restorative. I said, okay. So if you are caught vaping or you're caught selling drugs, what we really want you to do is feel the impact of what you're doing. So in that instance, this community service piece, I created a program that had the individuals go to the hospital for drug-exposed babies. If you've ever been with a drug-exposed baby, you understand. I don't really need to say anything else, right? That child cries and cries and cries. One baby had 1 hour of sleep, okay? So what they would do is they would go through the program and they would write a letter to say, I'm sorry, I will never do it again. Not restorative. But when we instituted something that could connect up, we started to see a drop in those drug-related offenses, okay? So that's what we're saying about community service. Peacemaking circles is what I spoke about with the African and Indigenous persons. And then victim impact panel is when you do not have a person who is willing to take accountability or responsibility for their crime or the harm they've caused, but you are a person in your healing journey where you want to go forward. So what this looks like is that you will have one person who's been harmed, or you'll have one person who created the harm speaking, and you'll have multiple people who were not a part of that harm listening. Does that make sense? So even if I was a part of a murder, but the person who I murdered, their family didn't want to be involved, someone else could come and hear me talk about my journey and how I now have used restorative justice to change. We've actually been told that victim offender obviously is number one, but victim impact is number two amongst facilitation processes, okay? So it is very powerful. All right. So now we're ready for our definition. Richard?
Restorative justice is a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. And for me, the key word is stake.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who has a stake in this needs to be part of this process for it to work. In fact, if there's anyone who is not there who has a stake, it shouldn't even take place. It needs everyone who has a stake in it, and of course, it's not just the person harmed and the person who caused the harm. It's others, as we've talked about.
Yep, their community. So, but notice how kind of unstructured this definition is. I want you to know that it is not to be placed into a bow. To the extent possible, as right as possible. So I'm not saying to you, this is a catch-all, win-all, everyone goes home and we all feel warm and fuzzy, right? Harm is harm. And harm does require some healing. But this is what we can offer to get us closer there. Han?
Okay, so you said stake is the most important form in this definition there. But if I understood you correctly, and maybe I did not, that with the victim impact statement, that was a situation where a stakeholder was not interested, right?
Okay. So you said victim impact statement is what happens in a criminal justice system. Victim impact panel is what happens in, yeah, I just want to make sure. And that is the one instance where we do not have the offender there.
Okay.
But for all the other ones, the stake is really important.
The offender, but
It could be
but
the
the
other way, right?
yeah, victim impact.
So what I'm saying is the one facilitation, let's go back. The one facilitation where the person who created the harm may not be present is the victim impact panel.
Okay, I was thinking of it in terms of the person who received the harm, the victim, was the one that wasn't present, but I had it backwards.
Yeah, so it can be either way. You could have the person who received the harm speaking, but remember, it isn't the same crime. This is a representative crime, if you will. So say, for example, we have all experienced some form of loss, murder or something like that. And now Richard is coming forth. None of us have anything to do with his crime, but he's going to speak so that we can understand this process, although he isn't actually a part of our, exactly. So that's why the stake piece isn't there, but all the other ones it is. And you heard me correctly. You were right. All right. Well, yes.
On those practices you were just showing, it's like you said some are informal, some are formal.
Yes.
Do most people just go through one of those, or are people going through many of these?
So remember we said that this one can be months, it can be days, it can be years. You can either go informal or formal, really, but remember who is in control of this process, the person who was harmed. So we never want to force them into a certain way. We can offer the options, and we always have food. Food makes everything great, right? When you break bread with someone, you humanize them, right? So we always do that, but we leave it up to the individual as to how formal or informal, or again, we're kind of doing the same thing the criminal justice system is doing. We're taking their buy-in, their control away, and we don't want to do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we went here. Remember how we were talking about this? You'll hear me say this all the time. That's pseudo or non-restorative. So a lot of times, I'm going to say about 5 to 7 years ago, every single person in the world was using the word restorative. They were throwing it everywhere. It's restorative economics, restorative healthcare, restorative this, restorative that. It had nothing to do with this restorative, right? It was just a way in which to connect people and draw people in. What we really are looking for is something that allows for the community to be set forth, our little dialogue before, in a place and a position that they were prior to the harm occurring. So that is what we say when it's fully restorative. But I would like you to know that even partially restorative is better than non-restorative. So I don't want you to think that if it's all or nothing. But I do want you to be discerning of when someone uses the term now and what it actually should look like. Does that make sense? So an example of that might be someone saying, in my instance, they said, we practice restorative practices in that one peer jury thing. And I said, well, how do you do it? Well, we have them do a statement that says they're sorry. And it went like this: I'm so sorry, 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 sorry. So very sorry, 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 sorry. I will never, ever, ever, ever sell drugs again. See, even you guys laughed. But when I tell you that was actually what was happening, and they were calling that restorative, I'm not joking. So they actually brought me in. I looked through their system and I'm like, it's great bones here, but we got to move it to fully restorative, right? So that it can be effective.
Can I ask a question about how long did it take you were asked to come on board, look at it, and for them to make the shift to fully restorative?
Oh, that's interesting. So I actually was able to go in at a time where they start to see an uptick in crime. I'm using that loosely, right? And so, because again, now I'm dealing with juveniles, I started asking questions like, where's the data? Where were you at when you first started the program, and where are you now? No one had any information. So when I started asking those questions, we started to move pretty quickly, to be quite honest. Yeah, so when you do a data-driven approach, people tend to respond to that. But my review of their system, because I wanted to be really fair, it took me about 4 months to go through every piece of literature. They actually had a system where they trained their peer jurors. I created a whole new manual for them. What else? We created more examples of how to be fully restorative, and they implemented it right away. Yeah, right away. So they were just at that space where we were all at a good, it was at a good intersection. And I think as long as they see you as a partner and not someone just kind of judging them, it works well. So, okay. So this process, Richard, how does it work?
Well, I'm looking at those black boxes.
Mm-hmm.
You need to give attention to unintended consequences of actions and program.
Yep.
Unintended consequences. Show respect to all parties, victims, offenders, and justice colleagues.
That's probably the most difficult, right?
Right, but respect is essential.
Yeah.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Do not just use the word restorative. And we just talked about this. Ensure the program is fully restorative.
Yep, and we get there by using equal concern and commitment. So anytime someone speaks, right, you have the talking piece, you then rest and let the next person speak. So that's going to be equal voice, equal time. Work toward restoration, empowering them and responding to needs. Support while encouraging them to understand, accept, and obligations. So a lot of times this work where you see here, these boxes are typically done in pre-conferencing. Again, what we never want to do is cause more harm. So if we bring two people together and someone is not ready yet, can you imagine what that looks like in a circle where you're facing the person? Right, right? So we're not forcing you. We're encouraging you to move towards the space and place that you are controlling. And as a facilitator, I'm just there to help you with the tools. Find meaningful ways to involve the community. Remember, the community is the other people who are involved and impacted. And then it comes full circle with encourage collaboration and reintegration. So that's something that doesn't happen in a criminal justice system. We actually have our system. We have our process. You do your penalty, and then you go back and you're isolated. A huge difference is we reintegrate you back into the community for restorative justice. How does everyone feel about that? Yes. How you do it? Well, remember now, a lot of our work is pre-conferencing. That's why I always say, if you move too quick, you will lose the entire process. So this is a lot of interaction. And I almost gave you guys the application, so I'm going to keep that. But we'll see in a second exactly how to do that with the actual application. Okay, so those are the signposts. Here are the 6 questions. Again, I'll share the presentation. It's not an issue. Does the model address harms, needs, and causes? Is it adequately harm receiver oriented? So does the person who received the harm, are they in control? If they are not, we have a problem. Are persons who cause harm encouraged to take responsibility? Richard?
As I said before, all relevant stakeholders involved. It's essential. Is there an opportunity for dialogue and participatory decision-making? And is the model respectful to all parties?
So again, now we're talking about everybody that's involved, husband, person who created. This little card was produced by International Institute of Restorative Practices where I studied. I recommend it. They have a master's and now doctoral program. So because if I didn't say this, restorative practices is a social science. It's an actual science. It is just not a fun thing to do or a tool. Restorative questions to respond to challenging behavior and then to help those harmed by others' actions. But remember how I said what happened? Not what did you do? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected by what you've done? In what way? That gives you that outside determination of someone other than yourself. Recall my young man who has tears streaming down because now his parent lost their job trying to deal with something that he did, right? We later find out that he has anger issues relating to something with the parents. So it almost made sense, but still, right? Kind of working through that. What do you think you need to do to make things right? Because remember, we're trying to restore the community prior to that harm.
These are questions that you would ask in pre-conferencing.
Yes.
So before you ever get to the circle, before you ever get to the interaction with all parties, all stakeholders, you're asking that individual in a pre-conference those questions.
Yep. What did you think when you realized what had happened? What impact has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? And remember how we talked about what is the worst thing someone has called you? It's a lot of reflection in restorative practices. But the reason is that studies show that most individuals do not reflect, so they actually cause harm. So if we are able to stop, and one guy put it like this, he said, I continued to cause harm until I realized who I was harming. So once he was forced to be face-to-face with the person that he harmed, he started to recognize it isn't just something he's doing. There's an impact. He said he had never, ever, ever thought through that. So he had actually been convicted, wait for it, not 4 times, not 5 times, but 10 times before he entered into a restorative justice process. And he never offended again. Now, I'm not saying this to catch all be all, but I'm saying sometimes people don't have regular skills that you might think are just, right? My friend used to say common sense isn't common. What do you think needs to happen to make things right? Right? So that is where we go. And I'm going to go through this. This is kind of higher level restorative practices, but I wanted to show you what I meant about less restorative and more restorative. So this really gets in kind of that master graduate training that we had. But this scale helps you to move and to address either in a classroom or in a work environment what it is you're trying to do. Some of the tools that we use is affective statements, which is that language, and group or circle. Okay, so again, this isn't something that we can go over in our time period, but I wanted you to be aware of it. Here's the way that we determine how it differs. You ready, Richard?
So in criminal justice, this is the system that we all see portrayed on television and we're somewhat familiar with, I'm sure. The question is, what laws have been broken, right? That's the first question that the judge needs to see at the initial stage of the case. What laws have been broken? The prosecutor informs the judge, this is the law that's been broken. Who did it? Who's been identified as the perpetrator of this crime? And what do they deserve? Assuming that they've been convicted, what do they deserve? That's the criminal justice system. In restorative justice, Question is, who has been hurt? And what do they need? Now, if you think about it, you think about the criminal justice system, and something that's always occurred to me, having, defended people in the criminal justice setting, is I've never seen a victim, after a person is found guilty, leap with joy. I mean, you see that on TV sometimes. It's not real.
It's not real.
People do not leap with joy. In fact, they feel very empty, like, I thought I would feel better, but they don't. So in restorative justice, what do they need? Whose obligations and responsibilities are these? Who has a stake in the situation? And what is the process that can involve the stakeholders in finding a solution?
So it
Those are
isn't
both
just,
restorative justice questions.
yep, it isn't just for the person who was harmed. It's not their responsibility alone. It's their entire community to come up with a resolution. And so that's really important because, again, it's that piece of thinking. Now, I think that we have the goals here. Restorative justice programs aim to put key decisions into the hands of those most affected, make justice more healing, as you said, and ideally more transformative. So we would like to move from restorative to transformative, right? To make sure individuals actually live up to what the CJ system is supposed to be. And then, of course, encourage accountability of those who create the harm. I'm moving because I want to go here. Are we able to do our circle? I think we have to hold questions.
Yeah, there is actually one.
We have a couple questions?
A singular online question, and our in-person audience got to ask ever so many. So before we move into our circle, just for quickly, this online audience member, and you might have done it while I was doing all the fun Zoom stuff, but could you please clarify in the pre-conferencing, or is the pre-conferencing done separately with each side?
Yes.
Separately.
That is key. Not only is pre-conferencing done separately, it may be done separately multiple times.
And
so I have had a situation where I would meet with one person, right? The person who created the harm, and they may be a go to go into the circle. But then I meet with the person who was harmed and they say, absolutely not. We stop. Then they might call later and say, well, tell me a little bit about how this would look. And of course, I tell them, you are in control of that situation. You can create a safe word, we will stop. No, thank you. And then perhaps 2 or 3 months later, they will come back and say, I'm ready to go. But here is the parameters that I want. And if, when I go back to the person who created the harm, they do not receive the parameters, we do not move forward. So again, the work is done at pre-conferencing. Everyone likes the circle because it looks cute, but the real work occurs prior to that.
And then is restorative justice only used when it's clear who's committed the offense?
I'm not sure what they mean by clear who's committed, but one portion of restorative justice is someone taking accountability or responsibility.
Gotcha.
So in one instance, I'm thinking of the 4 young men who actually burned down a bridge in a very small town. And the community was outraged because that was their only way to get out of town. Yeah. And it caused like $1 million worth of work. So no one would ever fess up to who exactly it was, but it was amongst the 4 young men, and we could still see them moving forward with the actual circle based on that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap up there with Q&A, and for our online audience, because we're past 8, I'm going to thank them so much for joining us as you move into your interactive portions, our in-person audience. But Tauya, Richard, thank you so much for all that information you've shared. And everyone in person, enjoy your in-person interactive with Richard and Tauya.